afternoon, or should I say good morning if you're in Asia, or for those of you on the other side of the globe, if you're still watching, good evening, good night, and we're impressed with your stamina if you're still up. We have this afternoon a Q&A session, and people have been sending in questions, so we'll endeavour to give some answers, and whatever we say, if it's useful, that's good. If it doesn't make sense, we'll just leave it. So the first question is from Shirani in Melbourne. Dear Ajahn, in the Sammaditthi Sutta, Venerable Sariputta talks about the meaning of one of right view. He says, when a noble disciple understands nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, in that way he is one of right view. And that there are 4 kinds of nutriments for the sustenance of beings that already have come to be and for the support of those about to come to be. They are stated as physical food, sense contact, mental volition, and consciousness. Ajahn, could you please kindly explain the above statement? Just want you to know that we consider ourselves very fortunate to have you as our Ajahn. May you realize Nibbana in this very life. Thank you. Yes, sometimes the Buddha would talk about the 4 kinds of nutriment. That sustain our life. When we say nutriment, we usually think of food, solid food, and that is one of the kinds of nutriment. When you think of 4 kinds of nutriment, if you're one who's more obsessed with food, you'll probably straight away think of, does that mean main course, side dish, salad, dessert, the 4 different kinds of food perhaps. But actually solid food, nutriment is only one of the four kinds of nutriments. The other are sense contact, so what we receive through our 5 senses, sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. And then there's mental volition, sancheta ahara, so that's a kind of food that we consume. We're constantly consuming intentional volition, intentional acts of mind, the will, what we are thinking, but particularly what we're intending. And then consciousness itself is another form of nutriment. These 4 things are keeping a human being going. And why? Because of craving. We crave food, physical food, so that's the main one, the most obvious one. You eat food, you digest it, and after a while you get hungry, so you crave food. An arahant still needs to eat food, but they have no more craving. So they reach the point where their mind is, they have no more desire for tastes, no more fascination with tastes, no more interest in that, the pleasures of food, the different kinds of food and so on. They just eat for the use of the food for the body, so they treat food like medicine. Other people though, ordinary unenlightened people, eat, and if we're not mindful, we're not careful, then craving slips into the whole thing, food thing. You don't just eat for the purpose of keeping your body, sustaining your body, for the practice, for living in the world for the next period of time. You start getting involved in tastes, the quality of food, the kind of food, all the nutrition, facts and figures, recipes, and so on. It becomes a cultural thing, a fashionable thing, and this is based on craving. So as long as there's craving in the mind, then we attach a lot of importance to food, give it too much importance. So it becomes an expression of craving quite often. And you'll see we often overeat, although sometimes vipawadanha, craving not to become, turning against certain experiences, resisting certain experiences, can even lead people to not eat. It's less common, but it's still a form of craving that forms around food. You maybe have some mental health issues, or we're resisting something, so we starve ourselves. Really, the purpose of food is just to keep the body going, but craving and attachment comes in. And that's the same for the other three kinds of nutriment. As long as craving and attachment haven't been observed, recognized as the cause of suffering, then they'll come into sense contact. We crave sense contact, and you'll notice that on a retreat, when you've cut off a lot of your sense contact by staying in one place, maybe not talking to anyone, not indulging in any entertainments, distractions. You've simplified your life, which is a very noble thing, a very good thing, the practice of renunciation. But still we have craving affecting our mind. So sometimes just craving any kind of sense contact will do. Good or bad. If we're not getting much sense contact, we're not too choosy maybe. We just want any kind of stimulation. I sometimes talk about this, like when I used to live in the forest in Thailand, when I was a young monk, you never saw overseas newspapers or received news from overseas. I used to get a letter once in a while, an aerogram. There was no phone, no internet in those days. So you still had sense contact every day, and you see people and talk to people and engage with the world in different ways, but it was maybe more limited than what I was used to. So then you start to crave certain things, certain kinds of sense contact. Food is one of them, tastes, but then also just the interest in the world, wanting to find out information about the world and see things and know things. So once in a while people would offer an English language newspaper and you'd read it. And most people, when they read a newspaper, they just pick what they like. The articles, the subject matter that they like, and the rest they ignore. But if you're craving sense contact, everything becomes interesting because you've got so little. So even the classified ads become interesting, or the business news, or the bits you don't usually read, or sports that you have no interest in. You still read it because you're craving sense contact. That's just one example. We want to see, hear, taste, touch, smell. So it's a form of consumption, and craving forms around this. And it's craving both positive and negative. So we crave for pleasant sense contact, and we react with displeasure to unpleasant contact. But all of this is feeding the mind. It's like the fuel. We say craving is the fuel for upadana, for attachment. And sense contact is constantly fueling our attachment, and fueling more suffering, ultimately fueling more rebirth, more becoming, more birth. And that's the nature of these four nutriments there, the food that we crave, or the thing that we can consume that we crave, that keeps life going and keeps us wanting life itself and attached to the world, and forming more craving and attachment out of the four nutriments. It's a self-perpetuating process as long as we haven't developed mindfulness or insight. As long as we are not weary and disenchanted with all this craving and attachment, then we'll keep seeking the four nutriments. So the third one is mano sancetana or volition. We keep planning and wanting to do things and go places and get things and have experiences, and do things that are sometimes skillful, sometimes unskillful, so we make wholesome and unwholesome karma. And that's another nutriment feeding us as human beings, the intentional actions of body, speech and mind, we keep falling into that form of consumption and wanting to make more karma to be somebody, or to get away from something we don't like, or to become something we do like and do want. We feed ourselves that way with that mental kind of food. So again, only the Arahant has given up the attachment to the five khandhas, and particularly to the sankhara khandha and volition. There's no longer any sense of self or identification with body and mind as self. So the karma process comes to an end if craving and attachment have been seen and abandoned. So the Arahant makes no more karma. They do still live in the world and speak and act, but these are just coming from pure wisdom, pure compassion, and there's no sense of self, so there's no one making karma anymore for an Arahant, someone who's reached Nibbana. But for an unenlightened person, they're still craving more stuff to do in the world. They want to do more things. And you see this in meditation. You've always got one more plan, one more thing you've got to do, and you've got to think about it. Get away from something you don't like, or some situation you don't like. Get towards something you do like, and all the actions that will lead up to that. So we're constantly being driven by our own volitions. And in one sense, it's not peaceful. Like sense contact, all these different kinds of nutriments, they're all not peaceful in the sense when they're mixed with craving, then they stir us up and they're constantly agitating the mind. The last one, consciousness itself, is it's a consumable. Consciousness is constantly arising and passing away, and it's sustained by a continuity of cause and effect. One moment of consciousness arising, passing away, sustaining another moment and another moment and another moment. So again, it's a very subtle form of nutriment, but it's still a form of nutriment for the one who hasn't yet seen craving and attachment. So consciousness still arises with a sense of self. But as we're developing insight, the deepest insight is removing the sense of self, the conceit, the I-forming part of the mind that comes from ignorance and delusion hasn't been removed. But when it has been removed, then consciousness is still there, but it's no longer attached to with self. It's just consciousness. It's no longer a form of nutriment that's promoting more rebirth, say. So there's this one kind of consciousness you may have heard of if you read a lot of sutras and texts. They call it the rebirth linking consciousness, patisandhi vijnana. The Arahant no longer has that kind of consciousness. The chain of endless moments of consciousness has been broken through the development of the path and insight and purifying the mind, letting go of greed, anger, delusion. The consciousness of the practitioner is gradually purified of wrong views and attachment to self. So these four kinds of nutriment, when they're mixed up with craving and attachment, and they keep firing us to make more karma and lead to more rebirth. But just like the Four Noble Truths, the way these are worded, knows the origin of craving, knows nutriment, knows the origin of nutriment, knows the cessation of nutriment, knows the path leading to the cessation of nutriment. It's interchangeable, the wording, with the words of the Four Noble Truths. So just showing you how nutriment becomes the stuff of craving and attachment, and they can be used interchangeably when you're talking about the practice. So, starting with quite a detailed question, a bit of pariyatti there. There's a second question from William in New York. Thanks for the opportunity. I try to put a lot of effort into my practice, meditating for about 20 hours a week. I read and listen to the Dhamma, trying my best to keep my sila and going to meditation retreats. But the thought of, I'm not doing the best I could, keeps coming. Even with my practice and actions improving, I feel that part of my practice is just trying to calm the agitation of work, life's problems and so on, So sometimes I think about going forth to really progress on the path. Can Ajahn talk a little more about the development of lay practice, the effort required, and whether it is possible to reach the highest level of realization on this way? Is it much more difficult doing it as a layperson compared to a monk? Well, in one sense, you're correct that whether you're practicing as a layperson or a monastic, you will, from time to time, be reviewing your practice to see what's happening. Am I doing it right? Am I progressing? Can I improve things? That's not a wrong way of thinking as such, but sometimes we become obsessive, obsessed with results, always judging ourselves, maybe looking down on ourselves, or because we are very idealistic and hear a lot of Dhamma these days, of every level right up to the highest level, sometimes we become fixated on results and then our lack of results in the practice, and we want to progress because we've heard all the good talks about the highest achievements in the Dhamma. So sometimes we're a victim of our own learning and what we've heard, and sometimes we become disappointed with our own efforts. So one has to balance this, but like you say, living in the lay life, you are exposed to more things than, say, a monastic. The pressures of earning a living, interacting with other people, many who don't practice the Dhamma, paying the bills, and then social responsibilities. Like, I'm lucky as a monk, I don't have to go to Christmas parties to keep everyone happy. This is our Christmas party. We have a Christmas party in the monastery, meditating and talking the Dhamma and doing the things that we do. Lay people, you have all these other obligations, don't you? You have to go to family get-togethers and Christmas parties and drinks with the guys and the girls and all kinds of stuff, which presents endless problems. So it can be very tiring, more complex. And that's one of the things you have to accept about the lay life. It is more complex, and the opportunity to get bogged down in things, distracted by things, caught up in things, take wrong turns from the practice, make poor decisions and end up in trouble. It's all there. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you, but the opportunities to lose our way are there, which is one of the drawbacks of the lay life. So the Buddha pointed that out and saying, well, for those who are ready and able and in the right situation, maybe go forth as a monk or a nun. Shed some of the baggage of the lay life and some of that complexity and devote yourself to the life of a monk, where you can maybe put more effort into your meditation, simplify your lifestyle, live in a quiet place, and so on. So that's this lifestyle of the monastic is designed for that. You might say it's the most ideal lifestyle, but not everyone is able to do it for one reason or another. So you can still practice as a layperson, and fortunately we still have a lot of information about lay practitioners from the time of the Buddha up to the present day who have done the job well, who have committed themselves to the practice of developing the Eightfold Noble Path in daily life, developing the goodness of a human being in many different ways. We know about them, so we can draw on their example. So in the time of the Buddha we have Anathapindika and Visakha and many, many others that you can read about and hear about who practiced well, had strong faith in the Buddha, learnt to meditate, listened to the Dhamma, respected the Buddha, Dhamma Sangha, practiced dana, practiced sila, practiced meditation, and maybe achieved first stage of enlightenment, Sodapati Pala, stream entrers, became stream entrers. That's quite possible as a layperson. Not easy, can't be done just like that, but it comes about through persistent effort in the practice. And I say that's one of the important things, is to have the faith in the Buddha and his teachings and his path, maybe from what you've heard, what you've considered and realize this is really a good path that helps us as human beings. You have that faith and then the willingness to keep putting it into practice, persistent effort in the practice. So learning to meditate regularly, but not just formal meditation, practicing mindfulness in daily life, using the sila, the precepts as guidelines for your behavior, avoiding things that are going to lead to suffering or making bad karma with others, unwholesome actions of body, speech, learning to avoid them, give them up. Fairly simple instructions, but quite difficult to put into practice on a daily basis, but that's what we have to do. And to be very patient with the challenges and obstacles of practicing in daily life as a lay person. We have to ground ourselves in the 4 Brahma Viharas: kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity, are essential for living in society, because you're surrounded by a mixture of people and a mixture of situations come our way. And sometimes you have to respond with kindness, sometimes compassion, sympathetic joy for the successes and happinesses of others, but also equanimity when something in your life or someone else you know or hear of is going wrong, or they're experiencing suffering, but there's not much you can do. And that's something you need a lot of these days in the world, because we hear about everything with the news cycle and social media. You're constantly hearing about the suffering of others near and far, and you have this sense there's nothing much I can do. But you can practice equanimity, and that doesn't mean to say indifference. It means just accepting that people are receiving the results of their karma. You'll do what you can, and looking into ways to do what you can. Altruism, generosity, charity, helping others, making that part of your practice, but also accepting you won't be able to help everybody in every part of the world, in every situation. You do what you can. So that's definitely part of our practice, developing generosity and the Brahma Viharas on a daily basis, improving our mindfulness, practicing the precepts, meditating regularly, and then contemplating the Dhamma. Introduce this all the time where you can in your life, meaning you do your job, you have your family, you interact with the world, but contemplate the Dhamma as you do this, hand in hand as you interact with the world. Train yourself to think Dhamma, and not just read and listen to Dhamma, but actually think Dhamma. So you're looking at your experience from the point of view of Dhamma, say the 4 Noble Truths, the 3 characteristics, the 4 Brahma Viharas, these basic Dhamma teachings. You can keep introducing them into your day. And that's the practice, the effort you put into doing that, practicing generosity, forgiveness, acceptance, tolerance, because not everyone we mix with and interact with give us an easy time. We have to meet with illness, difficulty, obstacles in life, so meeting them as a challenge in our Dhamma practice, seeing them as Dhamma, seeing the impermanence of things, the sort of things I've been talking about the last 2 days. Introducing these reflections over and over again until they're just second nature. To see, everything is impermanent. My life is impermanent. I don't know how long I'll live, so I better hurry up and practice. Making the Buddha and the Dhamma central to your life, that respect for the Buddha, like Visakha and Anathapindika from the time of the Buddha, give us this example. Like they kind of built their life around their faith in the Buddha and then their practice of the Eightfold Noble Path on every level. So it didn't mean to say they neglected their family or their responsibilities to help in society, but they made the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha central to everything they did. So, their other activities, say work, or family, social activities, revolved around Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, rather than what often is happening is, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha are on the periphery of our life, and occasionally we go to a monastery or do a retreat or hear a Dhamma talk, but then a lot of the time we just kind of forget the Dhamma. We're rebalancing our life in this way, centering it around the Buddha and his teachings and the respect and faith in that, and developing energy and effort in the practice from that. And I'd say the more you do it, the more that becomes obvious is the way to go. Maybe in the beginning of our practice we have doubts, and because you have a doubt in your mind about the way to practice or whether it's worthwhile, then that gives you like a space where other mental defilements can kind of sneak in. So doubt can lead to apathy or distraction or pursuing more worldly things, just the pursuit of wealth maybe, or fame, fortune, more kind of less substantial achievements or more temporary kinds of happiness. We might get lost in pursuing them because of our doubt. And the way we clear up doubt is through the practice. Just keep practicing and you'll see the results of what you're doing, and you'll want to do it more and you'll value it more. Hope I haven't lost the train of the question there. So some thoughts on lay practice there. Third question from Nilmi in Melbourne. Venerable Ajahn, I listen to Dhamma and do silent meditation daily. However, in lay life I have to associate with all sorts of people. I recently faced a challenging situation with some of my Buddhist friends. They asked what I did during COVID, and I replied that I got the opportunity to listen to lots of Dhamma talks because I was working from home. However, they said strongly that we do not need to listen to Dhamma, but just need to watch our breath. They were doing it and it's good for them. However, I know for sure that we have to listen and understand the Buddha's teaching to achieve Nibbana. But it's like teaching algebra to kids, so I kept quiet. Later, I got angry thoughts about our discussion and even thought that it's good to have restrictions again to avoid having to meet people. You're thinking like a monk now. However, I realized soon that this was some kind of karma vipaka, resultant karma, and I just listened to more Dhamma. In this kind of situation, what is the best advice for me, and what can I give to someone I associate with to follow the correct path? Well, of course, the world is made up of many kinds of people, and even the Buddhist community is made up of many kinds of people. We all know the various similes, like the 4 lotuses in the pond. Some lotuses are right at the water level, just need the sun to shine and they bloom. Others are just below the water level and they need the sun to warm the water and then they'll come up. Others are way down there, but if the sun keeps shining, the water keeps getting hot, they gradually come to the top. And then there's some that's just stuck in the mud and become the food of the tortoises and the fish. So people are at different stages in their development, even Buddhists are. So that's why we have to practice the Brahma Viharas. We have goodwill, compassion, but also equanimity, because some people will have different views than us, and some will expound views that seem wrong, incorrect. So tolerate them and consider, am I the one to teach them? Maybe you're not. Sometimes we have to accept, I'm not the one to teach this person. They'll have to find another teacher or learn for themselves. Whereas there may be other people you can help, give advice to, be a good example to. But everyone will have different views on the Dhamma, and of course we need to listen to Dhamma. The Buddha himself said, what are the causes for right view to arise in the practitioner? Well, 1, listening to the good Dhamma from wise teachers, and 2, reflecting internally on that Dhamma, coming to your own understanding of it through wise reflection. So if you cut out listening to Dhamma and just watch your breath, if you're already quite established in right view, okay, maybe that's a reasonable comment. But I think for most people it's just too simplistic, isn't it? We certainly do need to watch our breath more and practice more mindfulness. So, there's definitely an emphasis there, that's not wrong. But we still need to listen to Dhamma to remind ourselves what the Buddha taught and what teachers have taught. Why is Ajahn Chah so popular? Because he talks about the Dhamma in such simple but very meaningful ways and quite profound ways. It's useful to listen to the Dhamma, either the words of the Buddha directly or from well-respected teachers, because they remind us, it helps bring up heedfulness, mindfulness, gives us insight, because it helps our mind to be creative. We hear the Dhamma, how other people have practiced it, and how the Buddha explained the mind and the way suffering arises, etc., etc. You hear it and then you start to internalize it. This helps us to develop right view and understanding how to practice. So, just be tolerant of different people's views. There's certainly no need to get angry. If someone has a different view than you, just listen. Oh, yeah. And if it's prompting anger, ask yourself, why am I getting angry? I must be attached to my own view that's being challenged, or, we don't like other people telling us what to do, maybe looking down on us. So it's a clash of conceit, views, and craving in that situation that's prompting our anger. So maybe just work on the anger, becoming mindful of that and the process that has led to the anger arising. And, just drop the concern about the other people. Work more on your own mind to try and develop mindfulness, to let go of your anger and develop some wisdom around that experience. And then next time you meet them, maybe you've managed to overcome your anger and you can talk to them even if they disagree with you, but you don't get angry. That's our goal, is to be able to interact with the world without giving into anger, even when we meet with challenging people, challenging situations. And that's a big part of our practice. As monks, we have funny stories and funny ways of looking at this, because monks also get caught into arguments, different views and opinions over the practice. Some people say we should study more, some say meditate more, watch your breath, read the book. But really what's happening here is not so much the words. Probably both sets of words are good, but it's the sense of self, the craving, the attachment, the conceit lying behind it that leads to an argument, doesn't it? It's like two people fighting, bashing each other. So, look at that. I always remember one story. I was ordained with Ajahn Chah in Ubon, and one of Ajahn Chah's teachers was Ajahn Tongrat, who became an arahant very early on in his monk's life, but he was very outspoken, quite direct kind of teacher. And there was one time, there was two monks in the monastery that kept arguing about the Dhamma. And he was noticing this, and everybody was getting disturbed by it and looking down on these monks saying, why are they arguing about the Dhamma? The Dhamma is something high, something to be respected, something good. Why are they bringing it down so low by arguing about it? And one day they were out the back of the monastery, and in the time of Ajahn Man, Ajahn Tongrat, an argument in a monastery was so out of place. The monasteries were really quiet. Jungle, quiet places in the jungle, and if someone was having an argument, everyone heard it and everyone thought, what's going on? This is out of place, out of order. So one day they were arguing again about another point of Dhamma, who's right, who's wrong. And so Lumpur Tongrat went out in between them. They're standing, talking to each other, arguing, and he just looked at them both and he squatted down and he did a poo. This is at the back of the monastery in the jungle, no one's around. He did a poo right between them and then he walked off. And they were so shocked, they did stop arguing. So all the other monks thought, that worked. It may be an unconventional way to stop an argument about the Dhamma, but I think the point was taken as, when you argue about the Dhamma, you're just bringing the level of your mind down to this, the level of excrement. So don't bother, don't let your mind go down that low. So just keep practicing and learn to be mindful of your own moods and tolerant of others, and I'm sure things can improve. Another question, number 4, from Briantha in Melbourne. When we observe the 8 precepts, we are not supposed to eat solid foods in the afternoon. Are we allowed 2 meals, breakfast and lunch, or only 1 meal a day? For the afternoon, is any non-alcoholic drink permitted? Well, definitely it has to be non-alcoholic. Or are there specific permitted drinks and a restriction on number of times we can consume beverages in the afternoon? Well, in the monastery, in the forest monasteries, they tend to have 1 meal a day before noon, and a typical forest monastery may have 1 afternoon period for a drink. It could be fruit juice, tea, coffee, those kind of things, when the monks come together and have that one drink just for simplicity, and again for the practice of renunciation. They might choose to have 1 time a day they have a drink together for sustenance, just give them some energy during the afternoon. That's a typical forest monastery. But according to the Vinaya, there's no limit on the number of meals you could have. So theoretically, you could have half a dozen meals between dawn and midday if you wanted. So many monasteries will have 2 meals, or a very light breakfast and then the main meal between dawn and midday. But in theory, you could have any number of meals and you'd still be keeping the precept. And in the afternoon, you could have any number of times when you have a drink, as long as it's of the allowable, what we call medicinal type drinks, so like tea, coffee, fruit juice, soft drinks, those kind of things, sugar drinks. You could have many of them. The important thing is to understand what is food, what is considered a medicinal requisite that you can have in the afternoon, to know the different categories, and then to always have food before midday, and then keep the afternoon for just medicinal requisites and practice accordingly. So if you go on a retreat in a monastery or a retreat center that follows, say, the Theravada monastic code, you'll learn this, you'll learn what's appropriate, and then you can apply that at home as well. So you can learn maybe when you're keeping 8 precepts at home to eat just before midday, whether it's have a light breakfast and then an early lunch or just 1 meal. That's your choice, how strict you are and what you find helpful. And similarly in the afternoon, you can consider how many times you want to have a drink. And do you want to spend all your time in the kitchen mixing drinks and having drinks, or do you want to meditate? In the end, it's you're making those kind of choices. Because you'll see, food and drink, even in a retreat situation, can be a cause for lapses in mindfulness. Craving can come in, back to the nutriments. You're always looking for the next thing to eat, chew, drink, tastes, sugar hits, caffeine hits, and often it's associated with sociability. So you have your cup of coffee and then you talk to people and so on. So it's is something to consider, and especially on retreat, try and be more disciplined around these areas. You'll find it very beneficial for your practice. When I used to live with Luang Por Tui, he used to be kind of really strict with his monks. He'd allow them to have 1 drink in the afternoon per day, and you'd sit down to have a drink. You'd have a cup of coffee or cocoa or a Pepsi Cola or something. You usually just have 1 cup of drink and then you go off and do the chores. You do the chores in the afternoon in his monastery. And you'd just be sitting down thinking, okay, I'm having my 1 cup. And then he'd walk up and he said, wow, everyone here, they're just so attached to their drinks, wasting time drinking. They should be meditating or doing something useful. So he'd just be teasing the monks, just to see whether you're really having it because you need it, and you might need some energy, or you're having it because you just want to have fun. And he had lots of English words he'd throw out. So if a monk was sitting there having his coffee and then talking a lot because he'd have his caffeine hit, so he'd walk up and say, blabbermouth. Or what were some of the other words he said? Can't remember. He said, convenient but not good. Good but not convenient. He'd use that reflection a lot, because sometimes we do things that are convenient for us, but they're not actually good for the practice. So he's just encouraging people to think about how much they talk, how much they drink, how they spend their time, and he'd do it in quite a humorous way. He was quite kind to me. One time, somebody offered him a huge bar of family dark chocolate, a family-sized bar, which this is over 30 years ago. They weren't very common in Thailand in those days. And we are allowed to eat plain dark chocolate in the afternoon. And normally at his monastery, we didn't get it. But then one day he just, kind of with a mischievous grin, he pulled me over to his seat in the afternoon while we were sweeping. And he says, come here, come here, come here. And he, under his sort of pocket, he pulled out this bar of chocolate. He said, you take this. He said, if I give it to the monks, they're just going to get greedy, and then they're going to get lazy, and they won't be any better than the village dogs. So you take it. So I thought, oh dear, now he's given the whole bar to me, and no one else got any. I better go off and do something good with this. So the next day I fasted. So I just had a day just eating plain dark chocolate. So he was kind, but he was also very strict. Another question. William in New York. Hi Ajahn, thanks for the opportunity. I've been practicing diligently for about 2 years, but my practice is kind of bitter and not pleasant. I have been doing mostly anapanasati and mindfulness of body sensations. Is it normal? Any advice? Well, it sounds normal, sounds good as a starting point, but one thing you learn as a monk and lay people as well, we're practicing the whole path, the Eightfold Noble Path, as part of the Four Noble Truths. So the Noble Truths are teaching us about suffering, its origin, craving and attachment, the cessation of suffering, the abandoning of craving and attachment, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So anapanasati, mindfulness of bodily sensations, are certainly part of that path, and periodically there might be very, very important practices you're doing, but they're not the whole path. And especially as a layperson, I was mentioning earlier, I would recommend developing your path on a number of fronts. You want to win the war, don't just fight one battle on one front. You have to open up many fronts to win the war. So, practice generosity and charity regularly. Put effort into your sila regularly. Make that a part of your practice, reflecting on your precepts and putting effort into keeping good precepts. Reflect and develop mindfulness in daily life, of your posture, of your activities, of your state of mind, becoming clear, is your state of mind wholesome or unwholesome? And then from time to time through your day, maybe once or twice a day, you might have the chance to sit down and do formal meditation, and anapanasati is a very good way to develop that, to develop more refined states of mindfulness, focusing on the breath when you haven't got other activities to do, reflecting on bodily sensations, and particularly the impermanence of feeling, of the body itself, the component parts of the body, feelings. Contemplate them to see the impermanent nature of them. So you're giving yourself wisdom there. You're not just becoming mindful of bodily sensations, but you're developing insight into anicca, into impermanence. The impermanence of the body parts, the four elements that make up the body, and the bodily sensations, and then feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant nor pleasant. Contemplate mind states that are wholesome. How do they affect you? Unwholesome, how does that affect your mind? So there's a whole range of practices we're developing, and if you are feeling sort of bitter, inside, maybe there's some of the more joyful practices you need to focus on to support your meditation. So that's why it's encouraging practice of dana, practice of metta bhavana as a regular meditation practice. In conjunction with the other meditations you do, introduce metta as a regular, at least once a day sit down and develop goodwill for yourself and others as a practice, and then that will flow on into your relationships with other people. practice altruism and charity and generosity in smaller and bigger ways depending on what you can do. You'll find this generates a lot of joy, sense of well-being, self-worth, self-esteem, tends to be promoted through these practices, so that when you come to practice anapanasati or vipassana, you have this sense of well-being that helps your mind go deeper into the practice because you feel comfortable, you feel at ease, you have faith in the Buddha, you have less doubts, less self-aversion, less aversion to the world. Then you can really get into the practice. Maybe you'll get into deeper states of samadhi, and then insight can flow on from that. We do have to keep nourishing the sense of well-being. And so you'll notice, like all the good monks I've known who seem to have attained and progressed in their Dhamma and maybe attained the Arya Magga path, even reached enlightenment. You might never quite know if someone's enlightened or not, but people who seem to have progressed, you see they're all very generous people, generous with their time, self-sacrificing for others, materially generous, share what they have, look after other people, kind. They have all that, and you see that constantly in the way they behave, as well as their mindfulness practice, as well as their insight and their wisdom, their ability to solve problems and teach people and guide them. You see a whole range of qualities that they've obviously been developing over many years, and you might say lifetimes. So maybe broaden your attitude or your approach to the practice. Certainly keep up your meditation and develop that, but also see what else supports the meditation and wholesome states of mind, because this is part of the practice. Maybe something that just comes to mind, like you're from New York, and you're saying your practice has become a bit bitter, not pleasant. It's a bit like this, right? You go to Thailand, which is a land where everyone smiles, there's a lot of generosity, faith in the Buddha. So one time I was in Thailand, I think it was a couple of US Army soldiers came to the monastery to learn about Buddhism and meditation, and it was tea time, this time once a day where you sit down and you have a drink together, and they had Thai-style coffee. Like, they're from America. I guess in the US you're used to black, unsweetened, uncreamed coffee is quite common. You might say bitter, unpleasant coffee if you're from another part of the world. And these two US officers came and they sat down and they said, "Oh, we'll have a coffee." And one of them was given the Thai-style coffee, so it was really creamy and sweet and kind of thick. And he looked at it and he was looking suspicious. And then he took a sip and he said, "Wow, that's really good." And his friend who had ordered a black, non-sweetened coffee said, "Really? Oh, I better try it." He tried it. He said, "I want one of those." So it's a bit like that. You go to Thailand, you realize there's a lot of different aspects to Buddhist practice, just like coffee can be presented in different ways. There's the generosity, the kindness, the compassion, the forgiveness, letting go on many different levels that all underlies and supports the deeper states of samadhi and then wisdom that can arise. It all works as a package. So if you're a bit tired of the bitter coffee, maybe add some cream and sweetener and things might improve. This one is from Anonymous in Singapore. Hello, Anonymous. I hope you're doing well. Dear Ajahn, what is a simple way to understand the difference between concentration and mindfulness with regards to the present moment? Can it be simplified to mean that mindfulness refers to the content of the mind, whereas concentration refers to the quality of the state of mind? Well, one thing you might say is both mindfulness and concentration, I assume concentration you're referring to samadhi, they're both the contents of the mind. And we only have this one mind, but the Buddha in his wisdom can analyze the mind and see there are different factors, different component parts of our mental and physical experience at any one moment affecting each other, supporting each other. And so we can put them all out on paper and show them as links and things that go together and support each other. But in the terms of the experience of the practice, we just got this one mind. So when you talk about mindfulness and concentration, well, they're labels, concepts, and they're useful concepts, but it's still this one mind, and they're arising in this one mind. So one simple way of looking at it, we say, well, a moment of mindfulness is good. Many moments of mindfulness joined up together is even better. And if you do practice mindfulness, usually developed with particular meditation objects such as the breath or the thought of loving kindness or the recollection of the Buddha, there's many different ways to develop strength of mindfulness. What you find is you're developing mindfulness, a continuity of mindfulness. And that continuity of mindfulness, the more it becomes established, the less distracted the mind is, the less wavering it is, the less it wanders off, the more you experience what we call samadhi or concentration. So it's that continuity of mindfulness that becomes concentration. Except that obviously you can be mindful of many different things. So when you're developing samadhi, usually you're developing samadhi based on one object, focusing on that, mindfully aware of the breath, say, to the point where the mind becomes still. But having done that, so you can, as if, withdraw or step out of this stillness and contemplate, maintaining mindfulness that you have developed and that is continuous and strong, and you can contemplate and develop wisdom very well. So mindfulness can facilitate a few different things arising in the practice, but usually in the beginning we're using it or developing it as a quality, just knowing an object and developing that skill in maintaining the ability to know an object over and over and over again, say the breath for instance. And as you do that more and get better at it, there's a sense of it's becoming more automatic, more natural for the mind to do that. It's a skill that you've learned. You might know how to attain that state of calm where mindfulness is sustained and continuous. And with that sense of stillness and the experience of stillness, well, you get many different factors arising. So you have piti, sukha, rapture, one-pointedness. And so samadhi will, if you're studying the scriptures and talking about it, well, you'll talk about the levels of samadhi and the component factors that are part of that experience of samadhi. Whereas mindfulness, you might talk more about being mindful of objects such as feelings, the body, the mind itself, and so on. So there is a lot to discuss there. But you'll see in the Eightfold Noble Path, the seventh factor is samma sati, right mindfulness, and then the last part is samma samadhi. And so samma samadhi is you might say it's kind of the bringing together of all the other parts of the Eightfold Path. They have their different functions. But in order to achieve samma samadhi, you need samma sati. So sati comes first. As I said, there's more I can talk about on that, but maybe that's enough for now.